We're here with Derek from Revv Amplifiers, and we just kind of want to talk about some stuff, maybe put this out. We've got an event today in our store, and we just thought we'd put some info out there for our online viewers. So, can you give me a little bit of company history and
Sure. So,
genesis of whatever?
Yeah, so we started in 2014. Late 2013, I met my partner, Dan Trudeau, who is our president and designer. I'm the vice president of sales and marketing at Revv. And I met him. He needed somebody to screen print chassis plates for an amp, and I was in the screen printing industry, and I was also a guitar player, collected guitars and amps. So brought all the stuff down for me to print, brought the amp down for me to try. I plugged it in, played for like 2 minutes, sat my guitar in my lap and said, "Where did you build this and how did you do it?" And he said, "Well, I built it in my basement over the last 2 years, and how did I do what?" And I said, "You fixed everything that's wrong with my Mesa Boogie." No discredit to Mesa Boogie, I'm still a massive Mesa Boogie fan. But what I didn't like about my rectifier, the generator had like this modern high gain voice, but it had the right type of low end for what I was trying to play. So I told him he could build me one, and he laughed and said, I didn't even tell you how much it costs. And I laughed and said, "Well, I didn't tell you how much a printing will cost, so treat me right, I'll treat you right." And
right.
So we kind of started then, and while he was building it for me, we talked back and forth about, hey, like, what's your plan to mass produce, market this product? And it was pretty evident that like that wasn't his specialty. He is a electrical engineer, and actually he's a millwright by trade, so he understands mechanical engineering and electrical engineering really well, and worked a lot with robotics. So we started back then, and so 2014 we pretty much just built out like maybe 2 or 3 generator 120s. We got one I was friends with Mark Tremonti, so we got one over to Mark to get his opinion on it, and we kind of started to gear up to get ready for the NAMM show in 2015. And yeah, that's kind of how it all started. And then we went to NAMM thinking that we would leave with a ton of orders, and we did not. So we realized it was a long and hard road. And one of the coolest things about that show was we met a lot of YouTubers before anybody else was paying attention to YouTubers. So we met Ola Englund and Fluff and Trey from Gear Gods. And I didn't meet Glenn Fricker at the show, but he reached out to us right after the show, having heard about us at the show. And so it kind of started us down that path of like, okay, well, maybe we send amps to these guys to check out and see what they think, and because none of the big artists would pay attention to us. So
yeah, it seemed to be a lot of the YouTubers who just weren't necessarily super opinionated. They give something a shot too.
Yeah,
they'd be like, "Hey, this really does this really well."
Yeah, I mean, especially in like hard rock and metal, there's a whole lot of YouTubers that either demo gear or they do songwriting or do something in that space, and it just kind of was a really natural fit for us because honestly we couldn't afford magazine advertisements and a lot of the traditional marketing that the majority of like bigger companies were doing at the time. And because no one was paying attention to the YouTubers, honestly most of them didn't charge either anything, or it was like, "Can you send me $300 and pay to get the product to and from me?" And we lucked out that pretty much all of the guys that we sent them to really loved we mainly sent out the Generator 120 and the Generator 100 at the time, and almost all of the YouTubers we sent them to ended up buying them from us, and then they became like staples on their channels for years until every other gear company realized, oh, this is the best new form of like media for us.
Right.
So now YouTubers get paid a lot of money for doing
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say a lot of money, but way more than what it was when we started.
I watched an early video that Ola Englund did, and it was pretty simple. He was playing something, and then he'd reach over and he'd turn a knob and be, "Hey, it actually does something,"
Yeah.
That's like a demonstration that you can't just put into words necessarily. He's just turning the knob, and people are like, "Oh wow, it actually does something." Because a lot of the amps are so dirty and high gain, a lot of stuff doesn't really do much.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to translate on YouTube too because, as guitar players, I feel like we all have a sound in our head that we chase. Like every time I sit down and plug in any amplifier or any pedal for that matter, because I am a huge gear fan. Like we run a podcast or like a live stream called Gear and Beer, where we primarily check out other cool pieces of equipment that we find. But I find we all have a sound in our head and we're all chasing that sound down. So anything I plug into, I try to dial that sound out of it. So that's one of the things that a lot of people get annoyed with the YouTube like demo market is you'll hear a lot of guys say like, oh, that doesn't really do much, or they all sound the same. Yeah, that's because that's the sound in that guy's head, and he's trying to see if that product does it.
Right.
And to me, most of the products that I try, I will be able to get there to whatever that sound is, right? It's just a matter of like, how nice does it feel? I know that sounds a little weird to say, but for people who've been playing for a while, you understand that like, you know, how much sag something has, how much compression it has, and how it feels under your hands, right? That, to me, at this point in my playing, you know, journey, that means more to me than almost anything else.
Right.
You know? So, and with YouTube, I think that's near impossible to translate because you can't feel it over YouTube. You can just hear it. And that's one of the things that I know a lot of people or a lot of companies get ragged on about using a lot of different YouTubers when they launch a product. That's why I actually love it when companies do that, because I know what, you know, I know what Glenn Fricker goes for. I know what Pete Thorne goes for, or Tim Pierce, or any of these guys. So I'll go to those channels to watch the demo of a specific product, knowing what I'm trying to hear from them. And I want to hear how the product responds through each one of those guys' hands. Where if there's only like three you know, demos that go on a launch day, then you're like, okay, well now I'm going to wait and see, like, you know, I want to see kind of the best representation across the entire, you know, demo network.
Yeah, no, I agree. So that kind of segs into another thing we were talking about. So the feel thing, right? You guys are a tube amp company.
Yes.
We know that modelers are a big deal.
Yeah.
And that gets debated ad nauseum online, you know.
Yeah.
And I find that if you A/B something for people, they maybe can't hear the difference, but when you're playing the guitar through it,
yes,
it's a little easier to tell, right? It's that feel thing.
Yeah, so tube amps have a natural compression to them depending on how the circuits are designed. And to me, I'm not anti-modeler. I have the Axe-FX 3, I've got the Helix, I've messed around with the Neural DSP, I used to own a Kemper. They're all great tools. To be honest, if I was touring and I was a smaller band that had to travel with like a van and trailer, I would probably be using modeling, or I would be using something like our D and G20 where it's like lightweight and small, so I can travel with it easily. Right. Traveling with big heads is really difficult. What I don't like about modeling is that I find that it's almost too immediate, so then I lose some of that feel. And it's not that I can't still play them and still sound fine, and whatever show I'm playing that the audience won't, you know, like, or that they'll notice a difference. They won't.
Right.
But I'm less happy playing it. And that's nothing against modelers, because again, I would, you know, if I was in a band, I would
play on both types of things, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes when you just want to play for fun, it feels better to be sitting on a tube amp.
There's nothing, it's the same, like we call our amps like, you know, kind of hybrid technology, because we use, you know, fully analog, like circuitry for your tone stack, and, you know, like it's all tube power section and preamp section, and then we model speaker cabinets and microphones on the back end using the Two Notes Torpedo embedded. Yeah. Which for anyone who doesn't know, that's the same as the Two Notes Captor X system. So I still prefer to sit down and play with a 4x12 cabinet and a head over anything else. It is what feels the most gratifying to me. So, I mean, at our studio back in Winnipeg, we can do that all the time. But when we do our live stream, we can't. Because as soon as you have vocal mics involved, then there's just so much bleed and so much, you know, just so much headache. So we run in-ears and run everything direct. And I mean, that technology, whether it's the Torpedo or the Boss Wazacraft or the Sir Reactive Load IR, any of the reactive load boxes with IR loading, they've gotten so great that, you know, to me it feels absolutely no different than if I'm, you know, tracking a guitar in a studio and I'm sitting at the control desk with an engineer and my amp and cabinet are in the other room. Like, unless I'm in the room with the amp or cabinet, I feel like the modeling tech for speaker cabinets is, yeah, so good that it feels the same to me as a mic'd up cabinet in a room. Other people might not agree, but
yeah, I think it still captures the feel. You're still feeling the analog circuitry.
Yep.
I think it's like I said, doing shows, like modelers have become like the quickest, easiest way to keep the stage volume down. You know, you got certain types of small venues, house of worship, that kind of thing. you can't have a stack on stage.
Correct. Yeah.
But the hybrid technology is really giving the best of both worlds, and you guys do it excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting like space that the world has moved into. With modeling, what I got really excited about when I got a Kemper was I have a decent size amp collection because I'm an amp guy. So I have about 45 amps that are not Revs. And I was like, oh yes, like if I want a Marshall JMP sound for this part, I can do that. So I found myself like trying to like cycle through profiles in the same song where like my clean was a Fender clean and my crunch sound was, you know, a Marshall, and then my high gain sound was a generator, and then, you know, I would try to blend a generator in a like a boogie or something like that. But what I realized with doing that is you also don't end up kind of carving out your own sound by doing that, because you're constantly chasing down these other kind of voicings, right? And some of the best guitar players we know and the biggest bands we know, like, you know what Angus Young sounds like, and he only sounds like a Marshall and nothing else, right? And yeah, and I found like that sound that's in my head, I was like, no, this is my sound, I'm gonna chase that down, and that's what I'm gonna use when I'm playing. So, you know, and that's actually ultimately why I was like, well, I'm gonna get rid of the Kemper, because I'm gonna go with an amp, and if I want to change flavors a little bit, I'll have a pedal board with a few drive pedals that I can stack.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. The blend of technology is definitely the way things are headed. And again, I mean, the thing that shocks me, honestly, is clean channels in your amps.
Ah, yeah.
Because it's always like, every high gain amp is like, oh yeah, switch it to the clean channel.
Yeah.
But yeah, you guys got some very good clean channels, and they interact with pedals well.
Thank you. Yeah, we want to make sure, like, a lot of people don't like a lot of knobs on amps. And I'm not trying to slam any other amp companies, but I agree, in high gain amps, I've often felt like the clean channel was an afterthought. Like, you know, I'll pick on Peavey a little bit. I feel like the 5150 just nailed that like mid-range high gain tone, that like gnarly like chug tone, right? But the clean channel is absolutely useless. It's super stiff and sterile. It doesn't take pedals well. But they sold, I don't know how many tens of thousands of 5150s because of the gain channel. And a lot of high gain amps really do kind of get pigeonholed. Marshalls are bad for this, right? Like, a lot of Marshall cleans aren't great unless you're playing a plexi. So they kind of, you know, get pigeonholed to that's their one sound. And that was one thing that when Dan was designing, he wanted to make sure that we didn't have. He wanted to make sure that like we had a clean channel that, you know, to him and I, you know, Fender is kind of the top. Like, that's the benchmark that everybody bases everything off of for clean channels, or like matchless, anywhere in that range, right? And we were like, we want something that's as warm as a Fender, but it also has its own voice, and, you know, doesn't have some of the characteristics that neither one of us loved about Fender's cleans. Yeah. So he set out to do that rather than it being, you know, an afterthought. Yeah. Which is huge, because yeah, like the Generator 120, I can legitimately say it, and I know I'm super biased because I'm one of the owners of the company, but I legitimately will use all 4 channels of that and not feel like going to anything else in my amp collection. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I agree. The clean channel is just the one that shocked me, because, you know, they definitely have their own voice on the dirty stuff, but the clean channel was like, it's not a Fender. Nope. But it's a good clean.
Yeah, it kind of sits somewhere between Fender and Vox, right? Like, because it doesn't have the kind of the low mid characteristics that a lot of Fenders have, but it doesn't have the top end of a Vox, and I find that it's kind of well balanced in between the two.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it's not stiff. That's the most important thing for me. It's like, it doesn't feel sterile. I don't, as soon as I hit a note, feel like, I don't want to, like, don't do that again, you know?
You're describing the 5150 again.
Yeah. Yes. Nothing against 5150s. I own
No, they're great. They're awesome.
All iterations of it. So.
Yeah, exactly. But to be honest, Eddie never used the clean channel, right? It wasn't afterthoughts.
Yep.
Anyway, we're gonna do some demo stuff here in store. Look for some content on our channel, demoing some of these different amps in the future. These guys are on their way to NAMM, and we're going to be there too and hang out some more.
Awesome.
So we'll probably release some more content about some new products that are still secret for a few days.
Yep.
All right. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
See you.